Michael, this studio has so much work in it. It must go back a very long way. Could you tell me which is the oldest piece of your work here?
Well, the oldest piece that is in here, because mainly, it's almost entirely this work that I had made once I'd come to Edinburgh when I was 33 years old. So the earliest work really will date from about that period.
I see.
And that large mother and child figure, which was commissioned by Cumbernauld, was an early commission. So it's one of the early ones.
And you have a maquette?
Yes. The way a sculptor works is that he will work out his idea on a small scale in order that he can discover what kind of an armature he needs to build. If he's a modeler, because clay is very heavy and once you've chosen certain dimensions, you can't alter them. So it's at a maquette stage, in a rather sketchy form, that these things are worked out, and
Yes.
that's what we call a maquette.
Yes, I understand. And before you came to Edinburgh, you were at Camberwell School of Art, I gather.
That's right, yes. I had, in my teens, I hadn't really known what I could or should do. And I do remember going to the headmaster and saying, I think I'd like to go to an art school. He said, what do you want to go to one of those places for? Get a qualification and then you could dabble about that. So in fact, I really found myself at a teacher's training college, and there I discovered sculpture, which was an absolute revelation for me.
Do you have any work from that time?
I have, yep, downstairs, although I had to sacrifice a few works when I came up here to Edinburgh that I couldn't really transport them.
Could you tell us about this large statue of Judith and Holofernes?
Well, I felt in those years I've just referred to that I was really behind in the race to get somewhere. I felt that all these other people had started at an earlier age, and here I was starting late. So when I went for an interview, because of what I'd done at school, I could actually bypass the intermediate. So I thought, marvellous, I'll do that. I went straight into a sculpture school. And in fact, in my third year, I was shortlisted for a loan scholarship.
Wonderful.
Which was, yes, I thought quite good as well. And after making their shortlist, the task that they asked people to make was a figure carrying any kind of a weight. And at that time, I was already modelling a figure from this amazing woman who was in fact German, called Jutta. So in fact, already she was halfway there.
Oh, I see.
Called Judith.
Talking of portraits, there's a very, very dramatic gentleman right next to your Uta who, unlike her, is dressed in a suit of armour. Could you tell me who that was and who commissioned it?
Well, this is a statue of the Marquis of Montrose, and it's in Montrose itself and was commissioned by the society, the Montrose Society. David, who posed for me, he'd never done any modelling before. He was a Scottish dancer and really discovered that being a model is not just being beautiful, it's really rather hard work.
It's very hard work.
In fact, he did it very well.
Presumably you didn't have the suit of armour.
Yes, a lot of research went into that. And in fact, the concept that I had, I here represent him on the field of battle.
Yes.
And here he is in a suit of armour, and my idea is that he's scratching out in front of himself the deployment of the troops.
I see.
And he's got his head slightly turned
Yes.
to his captains behind him. And I researched it very, very thoroughly. And so, as for the building of it, I've been classically trained.
Yes.
And I worked from the inside outwards. And this figure began as a young man standing in his bathing costume. And gradually I increased by adding what was necessary. So the suit of armour came rather late on the top of his
Yes.
jodhpurs and things like
Yes.
that.
Yes, yes. And were there problems with casting it?
No, not, well, yes and no, yes and no. Since I got experience of casting myself, I gave to the foundry the figure with many of the fine forms as separate pieces in the
Yes.
cast.
Yes.
So they could then cast these in wax, then assemble the whole wax together and then pour it as a single like that.
Wow, that must have been incredible when you actually saw it all together in
It
bronze.
was, yes, yes.
It's a very, very striking piece. And you were telling me that you were involved in an exhibition of 12 poets at the National Portrait Gallery.
Yes, this is a commission which came from a development company called Edinburgh Park.
And which three were you asked to sculpt?
Well, the first one was Ian Crichton-Smith, which I did, and they did it in 3 stages. So these were then put up on site, and the next one I was asked to do was Douglas Dunn. He was the next one, and the third one was Jackie Kay.
I noticed that you've got an enormous range of works on different scales, and as we go around the room, we see there are people in costume, there are men, there are women, and there are tiny figurines and very, very large figures, and there is the portrait of a man in dungarees. Now tell me, was that a commission?
It was a commission, yes. It was a commission from a Spanish businessman who inherited it from his father. And he had a series of shops across Spain selling everything to do with central heating and plumbing. And he was part of a European association, and they had their annual meeting.
Yes.
And he came back and asked that he had persuaded them to commission me to do a figure of a plumber. And now casts of this plumber exist in Denmark, in Holland, and in
Really?
Spain. Yes.
That's really very international. You did a very large commission for the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Yes, that was the biggest commission I've done, the most expensive for the cost. And I had the wonderful advantage that the chairman and his wife came to my studio and I could explain to them, which was far better than just submitting a maquette or a sketch. And they took to this. And they took to it to such a degree that when I began to try to get the costings in, how much it's going to be, that it's going to cost twice as much as the money they got available. But Sir Michael Harris, without turning a hair, said, "It's all right, we'll put two years annual expenditure on that."
Yes.
So that became quite a big one. And so I was able to make 1/3 of it in the studio, which contained the most of the figuration. And then for my drawings and design, the foundry could turn in plaster the other pieces and so on. And I thought that I'd been very clever in working everything out. But when it came for the morning that this piece, the lower piece from here, was to be taken to the foundry, we couldn't get it out of the door. I had got the width, but in fact the projection of the modelling on the reliefs added so much, so we had to take the door off in order to get the thing out of the studio.
Wow. and so it was on display at the Glasgow Garden
it was.
exhibition.
And then at the end of that, the bank wanted to put it on in the main street in Glasgow, but there's some rules about must be space enough for fire engines to go. So in the end it was put outside the Kelvin Grove Museum, where it was there, I think, for about 10 years or something.
Really?
Like that. Yeah. And then the planners decided to have a car park. So I'm afraid that I quite like this fountain. It's now in store and I fear it'll never come out.
You fear it will never come out? I do hope that's not the case, because the pictures I've seen of it, it's just incredibly impressive. Michael, I'm interested in the narrative elements in your work, and I can see that you have behind you have the figure of a man who is dressed and has his hands above his head as if he's carrying something. Was this a commission, and if so, for who?
Yes, this was a commission, and it was a commission for a statue to appear in Monkland, Glasgow. And it really, this figure of a man carrying a weight is an illustration of a local legend about somebody, in order to atone for misdemeanors in his life, was instructed by God to carry this weight and then deposit it when he got a sign and there found a monastery.
That's why it's called Monkland.
That's why it's called Monkland, yes.
Marvellous. And you've got so many, this is another great example of all the different scales that you work in. There are the tiny maquettes, well, the small maquettes, then you have this scale, and you have also one that's absolutely enormous. Was that the final one?
That was the final one, yes.
Yes, it's most impressive. And again, to get back to narrative in your work, I see you have a very impressive, tall bronze of a man who looks like he's suffering, possibly even weeping. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
This came about when, in fact, I had been working on some maquettes for a war memorial.
Marvellous, it's absolutely marvellous. I see, looking around, that you have various maquettes of which have narrative elements to them. Like there's one I'm looking at of a young man leaning against a tree with a cattle, 2 cattle on it. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I'm the son of a farmer, and I always liked the shapes of cattle.
Yes.
I thought they were beautiful, and this was. It doesn't have a story behind it other than that.
No, I love the composition. I very much do. And when we're talking about your smallest work, I noticed that you have here a very small maquette of a man who appears to be wrangling a goat or a sheep.
Well, in this I was using wax.
Yes.
And the beauty of the wax is you don't need an armature, you just need a bowl of water by your side, so if it begins to lean over, you drop it in the water and you keep it in the sheet.
Hands up again, yes. Marvellous. And I see that you've got lots and lots of drawings all over the walls here, life drawings. Have you always done life drawing?
I have, yes. The school that I went to in Camberwell, one entered a huge studio where sometimes there were 3 models posing in different parts, and students working there, some were in their middle 30s. Vogel had the belief that students work for each other, and I think this is absolutely true.
Yes, it's true. Well, I think we've just about running out of time now, but I'd like to say thank you so much for having us here and looking at this incredible treasure trove. Do you have any idea of your legacy?
Gosh, legacy, this is a rather grand term. I just wish I could start all over again.
Well, I think that's absolutely the best way to end it, Michael. Thank you very much.